Yep.
It's working?
It's working here.
It's working here?
Yes.
So,
Two people saying.
okay. Two people are saying.
It's on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on live.
Yeah, it's on live. Okay, so just refresh. Okay?
Yeah. Still like,
The other card. Somebody's going to be right there. So you can you have a phone so you can check the live. Check it? I put it live. You have the phone, you have the link? Yeah. Just to make sure you're there. Not this way.
Oh, that is it. Now
That's a hard one.
We should
You've got
wear
the, yeah.
names
mask
on our
folded
names
up.
and names on our masks.
Around his hair. Let's see if she recognizes it.
One right, right. That's the one I'm looking at. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that one thing and one right. Right. And it's that say no. That was the first one. And then 1,500 someone was younger. My mother was from Israel, it wasn't ready, and she
Is the Zoom working?
Yeah, it's on.
It is on? Okay, because
It's
someone
not
called
Zoom,
it.
it's YouTube.
Oh, it's YouTube.
It's
Oh,
YouTube.
that's what
We'll
it is.
send the
Oh,
link to
YouTube.
everybody.
Okay. All right, it's YouTube. Okay.
It's on.
Okay. We're going to bring people in, so we should start, pretty soon. Okay?
It's on.
It's on? It's on now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. What can we? No, not this way.
Hi, Harry. We're rolling. Hi, how are you?
Cheryl, she picked you up right away, Cheryl.
Can we get somebody through those seats?
Yeah, they have to go around, please. Not please, not this way. Go around. They're going to knock something out.
I think you're pitching.
No, no, it's fine. Watch, I just realized I sent it to you. Okay. I don't have my name on it. You found a place?
How are you? Nice to see you. After that.
Eric is David. Betty, where'd you go? We have wait, the kids are over there. Betty, where'd you go? Kimson.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay, I'm sitting down.
Okay. Okay, just, we'll just make it as user-friendly as we can. Wherever, thanks, Alan. I saw a few faces from all my children's past today. Esty, well, let me just go through the formal remarks and I'll say it in there. So thank you all for coming to be here with us tonight. None of us can believe that it is 10 years, but it is. Each year since Chuck's passing, we have joined as a family to mark his Yahrzeit on the second night of Hanukkah. Esty and Daniel are together in Renana, while Michael, Joe, Mindy, and I go to shul here. the shul that Chuck loved, the shul that he helped to build. 3 years ago, our family was privileged to be all together in Renana, celebrating Isaac's bar mitzvah on Hanukkah. And so the 6 of us said Kaddish together at a minyan at Esti and Eli Tzur's home, thus giving each other a lot of chizuk. As Hanukkah approaches each year, we welcome this happy holiday with heavy hearts. It was especially poignant this year as Curtis and I were both at Kesher for Mincha this past Shabbat, when Daniel recited the Kel Male for Chuck, and then it was recited for Linda Pulitzer, Zichrona Livracha, whose Yahrzeit is on the 8th day of Hanukkah. Curtis and I share that grief together. This year, for us, for our family, is a real time marker, 10 years. Somehow long, as you said, Leora, and yet short. And we felt that a communal commemoration was a meaningful way to observe this 10th Yahrzeit for Chuck, who remains with us always. Cognizant of COVID, which continues to linger, mutate, and cause upheavals, we decided to share this commemoration in person and via Zoom. Thank you, Daniel, for spearheading us to plan this commemoration and for making the effort to be here with us in person. Thank you, Alana, for managing the children in Yerushalayim, and to Esti and Elitzur, who sponsored a Yom Iyun today at Matan in memory of Chuck. We were on Zoom with them earlier in the day. The time difference works better, the Israeli version, because it was 8 o'clock in Israel and 1 o'clock here. And Esti spoke about her dad and then conducted a siyum of Megillat Ta'anit in his memory. And there with her in her living room were Sarah and Yehuda Stark and Shoshana Tversky and Mark Baker, friends from Teaneck days, family friends, and we have Aaron here tonight, and the Sharon and Dave, and the generations. It's really very heartwarming for all of us to see our children friends when we nurture them as children all together in this wonderful town. We appreciate each of you, dear family and friends, who've been so important in our lives. We're blessed to live in a community of caring, wonderful friends with whom we raised our children and shared life and continue to do so. You supported us through Chuck's illness and remain with us in love and friendship. Thank you to Rabbi Baum and Rav Avi Weiss, who's joining us virtually. Rabbi Baum is here with Debbie. You were instrumental in helping Chuck in his last years through your very strong friendship and through your learning, your chavrusa, for which we are eternally grateful. Thank you, each and every one of you in this room, for making the time to be here with us, whether virtually or in person. It just felt right to hold this commemoration in our home, the center of our family's life. We all recall Chuck's complete devotion to our family. He certainly had multiple facets to him as a dedicated doctor, a Jewish communal leader, and a businessman. But the family was always front and center. And Hanukkah especially symbolizes the centrality of the home as we light our menorahs at home, ner ish ubeito. Over these years, we always recall Chuck when our family is doing the things he loved most, and that was a lot of things, especially celebrating at the smachot, where his absence is acutely felt. Thank God there are 4 grandchildren who are named for Chuck, from Liav, the first baby born in our family after his passing, to our 2 Charlies and Yitzvi. You're all here, everyone here, because you knew and loved Chuck. He was a remarkable man and left a proud legacy, which continues to impact our family every single day. And now I'm privileged to call on Rabbi Baum to offer some remarks, followed by Mindy and then Joe. and then it'll be Daniel after Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Rella, and it's great to see everyone under these occasions as well. Mindy has me down for 5 minutes, but I'm going to try to keep it to 3, so hopefully we'll be successful. You know, many of you know that I had the chance to learn with Chuck, to learn from him, and hopefully to teach him something as well. And the book that we studied, which I won't review in full in 3 minutes, was the Ramban Nachmanides. And Chuck was always taken by what I thought was the major contribution that the Ramban had to the world of biblical commentary, was the need for human effort and intervention. Obviously, the Ramban spoke a lot about belief in God, but he really reinforced the need for human beings to be active. He even saw the Jews coming back at the time of Ezra as more significant than the Jews leaving Egypt, because they left Egypt on God's wings, and they came back to Israel from Bavel with their own efforts. That's just one of hundreds of examples. I remember studying with him about Hanukkah, and he was very taken by the Ramban's commentary, where the Ramban basically de-emphasizes the whole oil story, not that he didn't believe in it, and focused much more, even exaggerating, some would say, about the role of the Hasmonean in continuing Jewish history in the language of the Ramban forever. We're still here because of what they did, and he ignores some of the negative elements that took place just 2 generations later. But I wanted to say something that I never got to say to Chuck, and it's a Ramban that I saw a few weeks ago. And from a later commentary is a great teacher of Musar, of Volby, who happened to study psychology at the University of Berlin. And he really extends this idea. The Ramban very often talks about prayer. We learn about certain laws of prayer from the Ramban. And what he pointed out, and he gave a number of examples, which I'll leave out for now, is that even according to the Ramban, prayer and belief takes a tremendous amount of human effort. It's not just something that's natural. Some come from families where it's passed down, but there's no individual who could truly believe without putting in his or her effort. And that's considered to be even a higher level of belief. And I know at times like this, you know, sometimes our belief could be challenged. We think about so much that was lost, the experiences that were missed and will be forever missed. But on Hanukkah, and the fact that your family gets together, it's not just belief in Chuck, but it's belief in why we're all here together with the common destinies of the Jewish nation. And Chuck had so much of building that Jewish nation, what we have at Ketz Torah, at Frisch, and in so many other communities. And we do believe that he is seeing the greatness even from afar.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us as we commemorate the 10th Yahrzeit of my beloved father, Zichrono Livrecha. I know that all of you here tonight fondly remember and miss him along with all of us. The Mishnah in the 3rd chapter of Rosh Hashanah teaches, V'chein mi shehaya over acharei beit hakneset, o shehaya beito samuch lebeit hakneset, v'shama kol shofar o kol megillah, im kiven libo yatsa, v'im lav lo yatsa. And similarly, if one was passing behind a synagogue, or his house was adjacent to the synagogue, and he heard the sound of the shofar, or the sound of Megillat Ta'anit being read, if he focused his heart, i.e. his intent to fulfill his obligation, he has fulfilled his obligation. But if not, he has not fulfilled his obligation. The idea of intent, and specifically the phrase, im kiven libo, had me reflecting upon the last 10 years without my dad. I can't help but think of all the family milestones that he has missed. The births of nearly half his grandchildren, over whom he would have shed such nachas. He would have been so thrilled to welcome them to our family. As he used to say, there's always more room at the table. He missed B'nai Mitzvah celebrated in Israel and in the middle of COVID in a snow-filled parking lot, and the first weddings of the grandchildren. Imagine his pride for the 3 grandchildren who have served or are currently serving in the IDF. He wasn't there for graduations, degrees, new jobs, job promotions, our new homes, let alone the Shabbatot and Chagim together here in Teaneck, meals shared at that table over there that always had more room. But I also think about the everyday moments. If all of us listen closely enough, im kivein libenu, we can hear my dad talking about the latest Yankees game with Isaac, Eitan, Tamir, and Aaron, or chatting with Geffen about the modern Frisch that probably far exceeds his wildest dreams, hearing about her experiences in the engineering track, conferring with Joe about a business deal, or perhaps giving business advice to Ari and Effie, engaging Sarah and Karen in discussions about physics and psychology, and offering to edit any of their papers, if they are written in English, that is, being fascinated by Talia's job in the army and her eye for fashion. We can imagine him reading Goodnight Moon to Yitzvi while tasseling his curls, laughing and being silly with Charlie Feldman and Charlie Hecht, marveling at Evie and Tagel's flexibility and gymnastic skills, having a quiet conversation with Liav, and enjoying Matan's various inventions, playing dress up with Yaya and Maya, and singing silly songs together. I can picture him sitting upstairs at his office desk, going through the mail, while listening to classical music at night, getting ready to go out for a jog on a brisk Sunday morning, much like yesterday, with his signature pom-pom hat from Grosinger's, or lounging at the beach in Kiowa, surrounded by his loving family. The previous Mishnah to the one about intent discusses a broken shofar. We learn a shofar that was cracked and then been glued together, even though it appears to be whole, is unfit. Alana, Daniel's wife, suggested that the broken shofar is a metaphor for the broken or destroyed temple, and she asked, how do we move on in spite of our brokenness? Every Rosh Hashanah, just weeks after the morning of Tisha B'Av, the day we commemorate the destruction of the temple, we have to put ourselves back together to do the hard work of tshuva, repentance. Still, appearance is not what matters. The broken shofar remains broken, but the community around that vessel remains strong and whole. What really matters is the voice of prayer and love that continues even after the devastation and mourning. None of this is possible, however, without listening, without intention. 10 years after my father's passing, there's still so much brokenness inside. The pain and the ever-present feelings of absence and loss. We honor his memory with the words of Torah we speak with our voices, the mitzvot we perform with the full intention of our hearts. In thinking about the discussion of mitzvot and the required intent, Rabbanit Michelle Farber offered a possible explanation by Rav Asher Weiss. He remarks that people do some things, including mitzvot, simply out of habit or instinct. When you do a mitzvah without any conscious or overt intent, you might still have some inherent intent. It is still an intentional act, influenced or even caused by those who came before us, by the lessons and habits and values they instilled. As we have all learned to live these last 10 years without Dad, the lessons that he taught us have served as a constantly guiding light, whether consciously or unconsciously. Those lessons are the legacy we pass on to the grandchildren, intentionally instilling the values he intentionally instilled in us. The path that Dad set out for us is clear, and I can only imagine that he's looking down at our ever-expanding table filled with joy and pride as we continue our own journeys down that path, his memory always present.
Beautiful.
That's fun to follow. I want to thank Daniel for coming in to help us mark this 10th Yahrzeit. Being together as a family and filling the table is the best way to mark Dad's legacy. It is remarkable that we've now spent 10 years without my father. In that time, there have been 8 new Feldman grandchildren, 2 bat mitzvahs, 2 bar mitzvahs, and 2 weddings. In the next 10 years, there will be even more family smachot. It is particularly at these smachot and chagim that his void is felt that much deeper. In our day-to-day, his legacy is so enmeshed in our lives that his presence is felt even on days I don't think about him directly. This 10th, or Asor Yahrzeit, had me thinking about the concept of ma'aser, setting aside a 10th. At the end of Sefer Vayikra, the third to last pasuk says, "V'chol ma'aser bekar v'zon kol asher yavor tachat hashevet ha'asiri yiyeh kodesh laHashem." All tithes of the cows or sheep, all that passes under the shepherd's staff, every 10th one shall be holy to Hashem. My father was a very generous man. He and my mother actively lived this value, volunteering a maaser of their time and giving a maaser of their funds to that which they considered holy. Romer, Mariah, Frisch, Chove Torah, Or Torah, Yad Vashem, and others. There are a million reasons we wish Dad was still around, but in many ways, he permeates our lives every day. We continue to miss him, strive to enact the values he instilled in us, and are grateful to you all for coming out to commemorate this Yahrzeit together.
Yeshut Rabbanim, Mom, beloved friends and family. For the past 10 years, our entire family, in each of our individual homes, has been lighting an extra candle, a Ner Zikaron, a light of memory, on this second night of Hanukkah, the last night of Dad's life, a decade ago, when we gathered together in this house, one last time, hours before he passed away. Tonight, in honor of Dad's 10th Yahrzeit, I'd like to explore the connection between candles and memory in the Jewish tradition by addressing a basic question about Hanukkah in a way that Saba, Alav HaShalom, may have enjoyed himself, by joining friends and family in a community of learning, and by looking at foundational sources that speak to children and adults alike, which we will strive to read with Dad's characteristic curiosity, respect, coupled with a glance at the very Ramban that Rabbi Baum mentioned. Although Rabbi Baum, you did not mention that he was also a fellow physician, Nachmanides. And we'll try to keep that dialogue that Rabbi Baum had with Dad, that we all had with my father, going through our collective effort. Our topic is deceivingly simple. Why do we light candles on Hanukkah? Every child, of course, knows the answer. We light candles on Hanukkah to celebrate Nes Pach HaShemen, the miracle of the cruse of oil. But the source for this answer is very unusual. It's cited in full in only one single source. The first one on this long packet. There will be a test at the end, of course. Bavli Masechet Shabbat Kaf Aleph, where the story is stated anonymously on behalf of the Gemara, based on just one of the two manuscripts that comprise the Tanaitic text of Megillat Ta'anit, which I'll explain. Let's begin by looking first at the Bavli from Shabbat Kaf Aleph. You can follow along in English if that's more comfortable. My Hanukkah, the famous question, what is Hanukkah, or what is the grounds for lighting Hanukkah? And this is Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary and the translation of his work. And the sages teach the Kafhe Kislev, Yomei de Hanukkah Temanaya Inun. There are 8 days of Hanukkah that begin on the 25th of Kislev. Interestingly, as this is the substance of Megillat Ta'anit, one may not eulogize on them or fast on them, and what is the reason? And the story is as follows: When the Seleucid Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils as if that was the primary purpose by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy emerged victorious over the Greeks, שהיה מונח בחותמו של כהן גדול. He only found one cruse of oil still with the seal of the high priest intact. ולא היה בו אלא להדליק יום אחד. It was only enough for one day to light. נעשה בו נס והדליקו ממנו 8 ימים. And it lasted for 8 days, as we all know. לשנה אחרת, כבאום ועשאום ימים טובים בהלל והודאה. That is the source, and the only one that tells the story in its entirety. Great. The miracle appears as spiritual background to the narrative of the historic military victory of the Jews, led by the Hasmonean, over these Seleucid Greeks and their Hellenist allies. This happened just yesterday in the 2nd century BCE. It's told when the Hasmonean monarchy emerged victorious, then they searched and found. The military victory is pretext for the spiritual miracle. This tension, as probably many of you know, is the grounds for a supposed conflict or hostility that some scholars in the past used to cite as evidence for antipathy between Chazal, between the rabbis, and the Hasmonean, with their the priestly Kohanim who overstepped their bounds and went wayward in subsequent generations. More recent scholars, including by chance the Gabbai of the Shabbat meeting, where I said Kaddish throughout the year of Abelut, have actually revised that understanding and now suggest a more nuanced relationship between Chazal and the Hasmonean. But in any event, what's clear from this source is that Chazal are shifting focus, however one wishes to interpret that. The miracle of the oil for Chazal ultimately eclipsed the military victory over the Greeks and furnished this almost perfect metaphor for expressing key Jewish values, including hope in the future and, as I'll come to argue, also education. Regarding optimism, there's a favorite Dvar Torah in our family that we first heard at Joe's bar mitzvah about the true hero of Hanukkah. No doubt you remember this. Yes. The unnamed Kohen, who secretly stashed away one precious jug of oil with faith that even amid the dark days of Greek persecution, a new time would eventually come with greater light. It's an idea about optimism, about hope in the future, appropriate to families of Holocaust survivors such as us and many of you, which is how we first heard it, although it's also appropriate to cycles of bereavement and grief when all seems dark. The Dvar Torah, however, can be broadened to include other unnamed heroes, including the extraordinary optimism of those who liberated the Beit Mikdash only to find it defiled, but persisted in their search for pure oil, even when none seemed easy to find. In children's terms, both the hider and the seeker emerge victorious and heroic in this tale of insisting that the pure seal of our nation would remain unbroken, a kind of heroism of hope, even when everything seemed severed, tainted, and broken. It's a lesson taught by both this holiday and by our Sabbath. Back to this source. The Gemara attributes our observance of Hanukkah with candles to a supernatural hero. That needs to be questioned as well. It makes for a good story, but problematic justification philosophically and halachically. Where else in Judaism do we institute a holiday to celebrate a nes, a supernatural miracle? In short, we don't. Pesach commemorates our liberation from slavery, not the plagues per se, or even Kriyat Yamsuf, which comes as a coda at the end of the holiday. On Shavuot, our focus is on Matan Torah, not the kolot and lapidim that accompanied it. We don't have holidays for the nation's miraculous fording of the Yarden, for Joshua's miracle at Emek Ayalon, for Eliyahu's stand at Har Kamel, or any number of other miracles. Why then is a holiday instituted for the justification of a miracle when there was already another pretext? Even more puzzling, what's the significance of this specific miracle? There was no apparent halachic need for it. Earlier in this same perek of Bamamlikim, we hear of forbidden oils, but this is not forbidden oil. This is impure oil, which actually may be used for a public use, public purposes such as lighting the menorah, This is a point that's made clear in a machlokah between Rashi, Ramban, and the Baal Ma'or. Moreover, why the rush? Had the menorah been kindled on the 24th of Kislev, or on the 23rd, or the day before that, or the day before that? If the temple was in such disarray that no oil was available at all, lighting the menorah could have waited a few more days until the necessary preparations could have been made, especially since there was no intrinsic significance at all to lighting the menorah as an independent part of the temple service. If lighting the menorah had been disrupted during the long period of Greek occupation of Mikdash, so too had the rest of the avodah. Lighting the menorah is hardly the primary element of the avodat Mikdash. The korbanot, sacrifices, and offerings are. Those questions alone would make this an unusual source. But complicating the picture is the absence of any other source that duplicates this, as is the norm in rabbinic literature. There is no historical precedent for this rather late statement by the Bavli. It doesn't occur at all in any Yerushalmi, in any Eretz Yisraeli sources, even in the early piyutim of Eliezer Kalir from Eretz Yisrael. There's no mention of Nes Pach Hashem. Let's look at two passages that are not part of Tanakh, but are part of what are called apocrypha, outside sources that didn't quite make the cut into Tanakh, but which address the redemption of the Heichal, the redemption of the Mikdash. These come from the two books of Maccabees. There are two for the price of one, Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2. These are long passages, so we'll just skim them. English is fine. In fact, Maccabees 2, which only a few nerds read, was not even written in Hebrew, it's written in Greek, which is why I even omitted the Hebrew. Let's skim through Maccabees 1. Yehuda Maccabee comes, he says to Achav, come and let's cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. This is the second source. And when they come, they see the sanctuary, they see the Mikdash Shamim, and they see the Mizbeach Hulal, the Dlatot Srufot, the doors are burned, all the chambers are pulled down, they enter into a period of mourning, and then Yehuda appoints certain members to guard while they set to the work of cleaning the sanctuary, the bottom of the first page. They take out the defiled stones of the Mizbeach. That's going to be an important point. The entire offerings have been profaned. They had considered whether, and turn to the next second page, to tear down the Mizbeach. They're unsure what to do. This is part of the discussion between the Rishonim that I referred to, the Baal Ma'or, Rashi, and Rambam. Until there should come a prophet to tell them what to do, they sequester the stones that they take out. They make then new holy vessels. They bring out the menorah. They start offering the korbanot, the ketoret, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to skip a few lines. Now on the 5 and 20th day of the 9th month, which is called Kislev, they rose up in the morning, begin offering sacrifices, and this is accompanied with great celebration. Harps, cymbals, and so on. They fall on their faces and offer thanksgiving to Hashem. Okay, you can skim to the end. What's missing here? Obviously, the miracle of the oil. In fact, there's no emphasis at all on the menorah or on lighting. It's mostly about the altar. It's mostly about the Mizbeach and the rededication of the Mikdash. Okay, so maybe it was left out of Maccabees 1. Shortly thereafter, Maccabees 2 was written in Egypt by Jews living in Alexandria. And from this, and this is an interesting source, it's a little shorter. From the Lord it was this, to purge the house on the same day that the nations defiled it. On the 25th day of Kislev, they celebrated the festival to Hashem for 8 days, like the festival of Sukkot. And they remembered that the previous days when they celebrated the festival of Sukkot in the mountains, they had been in caves. They were still in the midst of warfare, of armed conflict, and so there was no Sukkot that year. And so on this time, in the winter of Kislev, they went out, they took the willows of the brook, the branches of palm leaves, they sang a song of praise and thanksgiving to Hashem, and gave the courage and salvation to purify the temple. No oil, in fact, even no mention of the lights at all. In fact, the text asserts a connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot. a link that survives latently in our practice of Hanukkah, in several elements of our observance of this Chag, such as in the full hallel that's recited daily, also only done on Sukkot. The relationship in both holidays between home, as my mom was saying, and the mitzvah of the holiday with Sukkot, based closely on the relocation from our home to the temporary dwelling of the Sukkah, and Ner Ish Ubeito, the obligation that each household on Hanukkah have an observance of this, the only time that there is an obligation on the household. You can do the Pesach, but you can gather different households together, as well as the 8 days. The 8 days of Sukkot plus Shmini Atzeret, parallel to Hanukkah, and finally, and perhaps most strongly, although this is again deep in the weeds, a relationship that is perceived by Beit Shammai, who, in one view, used the model of Sukkot to justify their famous position that we decrease candles each night of the Chag, as it says, Ta'amad Beit Shammai keneged parei hachag, just as it's done with the korbanot of Sukkot. Both books of Maccabees, therefore, are silent on the story of the oil. Well, what about the source that the Gemara seems to be referring to? The so-called Megillat Ta'anit, a very old source, not so well preserved because it was not used after the Churban. It comes to us in 2 different manuscripts. There's an excellent article that I used for most of this by someone, also a Jerusalem scholar named Vera Noam, that analyzes both variants. That source, and the source that we have here, and the translation is not perfect, begins on the bottom of the second page, Megillat Ta'anit, that seems to be referred to by the Bavli, suggests that Hanukkah actually celebrates 3 events. When the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled again all the oil, which Vera Noam says is a perversion, because why would they have defiled just the oil when they seem to have defiled the altar and everything else? And there was only enough in for one day, so there we have the story. Turn to the 3rd page, the story of the oil with a miracle. And the following year, they decreed these 8 days of celebration. And then a discussion ensues of why 8 days. That seems to be the focus, actually, of Megillat Ta'anit. Why is it 8 days and not 7? Because 7 days were Shevet Yemei Miluim. The dedication of the temple is the basis. That is the example, the template for Hanukkah, and that is only 7 days in Bamidbar. So what reason did they come to make this dedication of 8 days? That's towards the end of the English translation, at least. Because when they came back, they nichnasu beit Hasmonean lehechal. This is the Hebrew where I'm citing you in the translation. They created shiva shipudim shel barzel biadam v'chafum ba'at v'yidliku behem et menorah. They found no menorah. There was no menorah. It had been destroyed, and so they created a makeshift menorah out of branches, stakes of iron that they then tipped with they covered with tin, and they created these new vessels. First and foremost, a new menorah. They also were working for 8 days on cleansing the temple. So this source seems to say 3 separate things. There are 8 days because it took 8 days to prepare the mikdash for service again. A new menorah was built, and there was also this miracle of the oil. Well, which one is it? That's a complicated question. And even here, however, the miracle of the oil is not the sole reason, or maybe even the primary reason. Instead, there's justification for the 8 days as commemoration for the 8 days needed to clear the mikdash and ready it for renewed service. This source, Megillat Ta'anit, also helps us understand the ambivalence these early sources had even over the very name of this holiday. Some sources talk about it as Orot, as the name of the holiday. Hanukkah, of course, has nothing to do with lights. Hanukkah means rededication or dedication. That's what the name means, which also is in this source, dedicating the temple. Why then the association with light? Megillat Ta'anit turns our attention to the biblical model for the dedication of the sanctuary, which is the Mishkan, told in Bamidbar, which we also read every day of this holiday. At the end of the dedication of the Mishkan, after each of the tribal Nisim have brought their lavish donations, the command is given for Aaron HaKohen to light the menorah. This is Behalotcha Taneirot. Rashi, at the bottom of this page, cites an interesting midrash to explain why the Chanukah HaMishkan is juxtaposed with lighting of the menorah. Rashi says, Lama nisbecha parshat menorah parshat Nisim. Why these two sources together? When he saw all the gifts of the princes, he was distressed, for he had no role. The Leviim, the Kohanim, did not bring their own dedication. Whereupon the Holy One said, your share is greater than their share of the princes. You have menorah. The Ramban, here's what Rabbi Baum was referring to. And this is the last major text I want to introduce, and then we'll wrap up. The Ramban disagrees. He cites Rashi, and then says, "Velo nitbarer le'ah." You don't understand. Why would this have consoled Aaron? After all, he shouldn't. Aaron HaKohen, the high priest, would not have been consoled by the incense, the ktoret, that he gave morning and night, by all the other korbanot, by avodat Yom HaKippurim. They're far greater gifts than lighting of the menorah. How about all the other sacrifices that Aaron brought, even just during the dedication of the Mishkan? And so, jumping down a little bit, and so what is it? That he actually was referring to Remez min parsha al Chanukah Shamirot she'ayta bebayit sheni ayidei Aaron banav v'tavim Hashmonai Kohen Gadol banav. What is the consolation? It's not what had already happened, that Aaron is the equal to what has happened in the past, the previous few days of the bringing of the gifts of the Kohan, of the Nisiim. But here, according to the Ramban, who has a Kabbalistic bent, is a reference, an allusion to the Hanukkah that we celebrate, the Hanukkah of the Hasmonean, which occurred thanks to Matityahu, the Hashmonaim, to other priests. This is the lasting Hanukkah, the permanent Hanukkah, that would be an eternal consolation, and in fact greater, as the Midrash says, greater than the dedication of the temple, the dedication of the Mishkan, excuse me. At the end of the dedication of the Mishkan, after each of the tribal Nisiim have come, the Ramban looks not to the past, but toward the future. He disagrees with Rashi by turning from the one time, the unique Hanukkah of the Mishkan, to our perennial Hanukkah. One could say that this double vision, looking back, as well as looking ahead, far into the future, is the synthesis that we enjoy from looking at our commentators, at our great Rabbanim. It's also a lesson we can draw from our parents and for us from Dad, who was a link to this golden age of America that had passed, to this large family, but though an only child, gave birth to our, thank God, flourishing family. Moreover, the shift from the rededication of the altar, of the Mishkan, of the temple, towards a discussion of Hanukkah as rededicating something that would come long in the future, something more that is commemorated, that is celebrated through the more subtle, amorphous, more luminous light, is how Chazal create the transition from an emphasis only on the single site of the temple to each of our homes today. What the Bavli is imagining is a shift from Kohanim practicing at one time to us spreading light each and every year in our Bayit. Not Beit HaMikdash, but a light that is spread into the Bayit Yehudi, to each of our homes. Ner Yishu Beito. There's no obligation for us to create a new menorah every year. We have that model. We have that Yerusha. Our obligation is to kindle that light, to see that ray, that beacon, streaming from long ago into our homes. The menorah can be lost, but the light is sustained. The light of Hanukkah, therefore, is this extension of something that once was, a vessel that is lost, but something that we can see in our own time. It's merely light. It's both there and not there. And this view toward the future, a future that must be illuminated and sustained and brightly maintained in each of our homes, even when the sacred original vessel is no longer, is of course the metaphor for how I think of the loss of Dad. How we maintain his memory, his optimism, his love, his charm, his wisdom, that continues to light the way for each of us, and no doubt for many of you, even longer after he has left us. My kids, who unfortunately never knew him, still know of his example, and I'm sure it's the same for all of us. That legacy remains all the more bright for those of us who were privileged to know him directly. The notion of leaving behind fuel for a future that one will not personally see is the essence, not of Hanukkah, but of chinuch, of education. Dad's great passion and lifelong commitment, along with Mom, as community leaders. Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, makes this comparison explicit. He would always talk about the miracle of the oil as somehow symbolizing the core value of Jewish education. Rabbi Sachs would say that when our sages ultimately shifted from a focus on Hasmonean military victory and historic rededication of Mikdash as Hanukkah the Bayit, they turned it into a continuing rededication to chinuch rather than Hanukkah. The holiday of lights was accepted for posterity through a change that came through another late member of the Hasmonean household. And this is one of the last two sources, second to last source I just want to share with you. Although it has nothing overtly to do with Hanukkah, the source, let me see, that's my place, about Yoshua ben Gamla, after the Ramban, it's from Baba Batra, was crucial for Rabbi Sachs, and I hope to share this idea with you. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Bram Zachor Oto Ha'ish Latov Yoshua ben Gamla Shmo, She'ilmalei hu nishkachech Torah Yisrael, Shebetchila Mishe Yesh Lo Av Melamed Torah, Mishe Ein Lo Av Lo Haya Lamed Torah. Ad Sheba Yoshua ben Gamla, V'tikein Sheyu Moshevim Melamdei Tinokot B'chol Midina. Rav Yehuda would say, there was this complicated figure, a member of the Hasmonean house, whose wife was someone who was illicit to him and purchased for him the high priesthood, the Kuna Gdolah, and yet we remember him for good. Why? Because he instituted, Yoshua ben Gamla did, universal education. Until that point, everyone would learn from his father, and he who did not have a father would not learn. Came Yoshua ben Gamla, and every child can learn. It's a poignant Gemara for us to read. Misha ein lo av. Those who do not have a father can still learn, thanks to the intercession of one of these latter Hasmoneans, and Rav Yehuda cites him in credit. For it is through education and looking and sharing our text and sharing our tradition that we continue. I think this last source from Rabbi Sachs it powerfully encapsulates it. Long ago, the Jewish people came to the conclusion that to defend a country, you need an army, but to defend a civilization, you need schools. The single most important social institution is the place where we hand on our vows to the next generation, where we tell our children where we've come, what ideals we fought for, what we learned along the way. It was here in this home that we learned that value. Dad was someone who was able to connect the home to the school, and made them both places of holiness, or mikdash ma'at in every sense. We've been through a great deal over the past 10 years, And gathering together in this home 10 years later, it makes me realize something that also, I'll just read this quickly. The final source here from Brachot Hey expresses metaphorically. Rabbi Eliezer was ill, fell il chalash, came to his house Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan came into his room and saw that he was lying in a dark room. He exposed his arm, and the visitor, Rabbi Yochanan, illuminated the room. 10 years ago, this was a place, unfortunately, in the middle of Hanukkah, of darkness for us. But what changed it was to turn not just the houses into places of light, but for each person, as Avi will now explain, to become a source of light. You have each illuminated our lives and brought light into our home during our most difficult and darkest moments. As Rav Avi will now explain, the highest value is for each of us to do that for others, to be sources of light for one another. Through your steadfast friendship and love, you've done that for us. Chag Urim Sameach, and we're now honored to hear from Rav Avi, who could not be here tonight with us in person, but sent us a message full of radiance and light. And it will conclude with a song in classic Rav Avi style that will conclude our program in 10 minutes time. You can come closer. This is the end. You can come over here with your mask, without mask, whatever you come.
Is it going to work? It's not working?
Shelley and Eric's daughter.
Please hold. Screen. Yes, maybe.
In the introduction to the book Journey to Open Orthodoxy,
Can you move that one over there?
the dedication reads, for Dr. Charles H. Feldman, Zichrono Livracha,
I'll send a link
my
after.
cherished friend and chavruta, who dreamed the dream of a modern, inclusive, open orthodoxy, and who lived an inspirational life dedicated to Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, and the larger world. Today is the 10th anniversary of the passing of my dear friend, Chuck. It's Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is referred to in our literature as the Chag HaUrim, the Festival of Lights. In Hasidic thought it is said, K'tzat me'ha'or doche harbe min ha'choshech. A little bit of light can push away an abundance of darkness. And the ultimate light is not the light of a candle. It's not even the light of a wick in oil. The ultimate light is a human light that sees darkness and pushes away that darkness. This is the legacy of Chuck Feldman, of Dr. Charles H. Feldman, Zichrono Livracha. He was a light that pushed away the darkness on so many different levels. Concerning light, there is an Or Hashem, the Or Torah. Vayome Elokim Yehi Or. God said, let there be light. Chuck walked with God. In our weekly chavrusas, when we studied the Torah, God's Torah, I found Chuck to be so insightful, so thoughtful, so original, so honest. In the end, Chuck, as I told you many times, I was not the teacher. You were the Rebbe, and I was the student. And in Midrashic literature, there is what's called the Or Ahava, the light of love. Every day, we seal that first blessing of Shema with Baruch Atah Hashem, Yotzer HaMa'orot, God created the lights. It's not a coincidence that immediately afterwards we read Ahava Rabbah. Chuck lived a life of the light of love. How he loved Rella, his children, his grandchildren. I have so many memories of being with Chuck and with Rella at different smachot. I'm thinking in particular of one wedding when Chuck was looking out and he whispered in my ear, Avi, how blessed I am. This was Chuck's life. He lived and breathed the light of love. And there's another light, and that is the light emanating out to help the world, to help Am Yisrael. Lehudim hayta ora b'simcha b'sason v'ikar. Or as Yeshayahu Hanavi says, that we are to try to be in our small way an or lagoim, a light to the nations, contributing to improving the world. This was Chuck's life. Chuck was a healer. He was there to help those who were vulnerable, who were sick, who needed healing with his genius, not only with his mind, but with his heart, which was overflowing with care. And how Chuck, together with Rella, how you, Chuck, loved Am Yisrael, how you loved Medinat Yisrael, in your own communities, giving so much of yourself to so many institutions. We had so many talks about different institutions and your candor and your honesty as you evaluated what they did, what they could do more. Those are moments, those are times I'll never, ever forget. Chuck was that light, Or Hashem, Or Ahava, Or LaYehudim, and Or LeHa'olam Kulo. At Chuck's funeral, I spoke about the concept of Hadar. After all, Hanukkah, when we light the candles, every day another candle, and we increase it, it is what is called a mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, as everyone does the lighting. But on this, the 10th anniversary, another approach to the idea of Hadar. Hadar is Aramaic for the Hebrew word Hagar. Hagar, He Gimel Resh, one who presides, one who lives, one whose presence is always felt. There's a difference between a relationship of contact and a relationship of presence. In life, our relationships with others is a relationship of contact. When we embrace each other, when we converse with each other, when we call each other, when we email to each other. But when one is gone, there's no more contact. And while there's no substitute for that lack of contact, we feel and we can feel the presence. And presence is an experience that can be felt in any time and in any place. Dear Chuck, my dear, dear Chuck, you left this world much, much too young. But given that reality, your light, like the light from the stars of millions of years ago, your light still shines. We feel your presence. And I want to bless you, Rella. I want to bless your dear children and grandchildren who in their own way have brought so much light to the world. I want to bless each of you in this extraordinary family. I want to bless you with what you already feel. May you feel it more. The presence of your Abba, your presence of your Saba, the presence of my beloved, dear Chuck. Always feeling Chuck tapping you on the shoulder, showing you the way. In the spirit of Parchenu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad, Ba'or Panecha. Oh God, bless us with the light of Chuck forever. Parchenu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad, Kulanu Ke'echad, Be'or Panecha. Bless us, dear Chuck, with your light. May we always feel your presence. Bachenu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad, Kulanu Ke'echad, Be'or Panecha, Bachenu Avinu. Bless us, dear Chuck, with your light forever and ever. Tehei nishmato tzura b'tzura chaim. Rest in peace. Our blessings and love. God bless all of you.
Thank you everyone for being here to share this commemoration with all of us. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your very brilliant Devar Torah and bringing a new understanding of the rabbinic transition from what this holiday was to what it has become, and realizing it through the conclusion of Rav Avi as light. I think we all can go home feeling very illuminated and enriched by what we heard. And it is so true that Chuck has not been with us for 10 years, but he is very much with us and continues to be. So thank you. Chag Sameach, Chag Hanukkah Sameach. And please, we have a lot of food in here. And you know, we would love to have some of it go into your stomachs and not stay here. So thank you from my heart for just being here to make this online, on Zoom, in person, however we were here all together, and I appreciate it all very much. Mindy, Joe, Michael, everyone who is here to be with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good.